Good afternoon. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online. I'm Drew Clark, CEO of Broadband Breakfast, back from Scout Camp. Thanks so much to Ted Hearn for filling in for me last week in a very interesting session of undersea cables and broadband. Today, we're going to address another aspect of resilience or security. We'll get into the topic shortly, but it's an exciting one, and we've got a really great panel to talk through it. But before we get there, I just want to thank everyone for taking this hour to be with us. This is a free weekly webcast, Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We do this every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. At Broadband Breakfast, our focus is better broadband, better lives. We do reporting, and we gather people in events and in community to talk through the policy and technology issues around better broadband, better lives, the infrastructure, the applications and uses, the edge issues and controversies. We produce about 12 to 15 stories a day. Almost all are hard news, but we also have an expert opinion section for our panelists and many, many others to comment on and express their viewpoints. And I should add that for those of you, everyone who signs up for free membership in Broadband Breakfast or attends one of our events has access to the free Broadband Breakfast community. But we do have a premium product, our Breakfast Club membership, and we hope you'll join that. It's only $99 to join per month. But if you buy for a year, since you're a free member, $490 a year, and you get access to the recorded restreams, or I should say the streams of these events. Obviously, they're available for free live, but for the recordings, we ask you to be a member, as well as discounts on our events. We do in-person events every quarter, and we actually just finished one about 4 weeks ago, the Speeding Bead Summit, which I may come back to a little bit later just now. But we're really excited about an upcoming event that we're going to be doing in September on resilient digital infrastructure. And what is resilient digital infrastructure? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Today is a little bit of a preview on that topic as we consider with our experts the subject of making America's digital infrastructure resilient. I do also want to point out that we're able to do this free weekly webcast, Broadband Breakfast Live Online, with the support not only of each of you who are Breakfast Club members, but our sponsors. Today, we'd like to highlight our sponsor, NextNav, Inc. NextNav is on a mission to resolve national security challenges with innovative 3D positioning, navigation, and timing technology. NextNav's resilient solutions provide a vital terrestrial component, I should say, a vital terrestrial complement and backup to GPS, of course, which is global positioning systems, ensuring accuracy and reliability for critical infrastructure and next-gen applications when it matters most. For more information, visit nextnav.com. That's NEXTNAV, all one word, .com. Thank you to NextNav, our sponsor, and all of our sponsors. Let's go ahead and open the view up to all of our panelists. Go ahead and turn your camera on there. Samantha as well. Thank you to be with us for this topic. Let me just say a few more words about resilience, because this is one of those topics that we could get 6 people looking at an elephant and they'd all come up with a different part of the elephant. I think there's a movie, right? There's a movie about that topic, isn't there? So this is one of those topics that it could mean cybersecurity, it could mean environmental, sustainability, it could mean defense and preparation from foreign adversaries attacking us. There's a lot of high-risk possible threats. And as America's broadband infrastructure faces growing pressure from cyber threats, geopolitical tensions like the cable cutting we talked about last week, and increasingly frequent natural disasters. I mean, my goodness. I mean, I was at a scout camp last week and we had lots of rain. And so I was hyped, and I had just heard about the shocking news from Texas of the camp that was flooded and the incredible tragedy that happened there. Now, who knows whether any of that could have been avoided, but what we do know is we need the emergency protections when we've got these kinds of natural disasters. So the need for resilient, future-proof networks has become more critical than ever. So we're going to dip into this range of issues about which many key observers are beginning to raise an alarm and demand greater awareness, ensuring a resilient and secure national digital infrastructure. And, I've already teed up a couple of these issues. I'm not an expert. Maybe some of our panelists are experts on cybersecurity, satellite, rocketry, high-risk threat landscapes like a modern-day geomagnetic storm. I wasn't aware of the Carrington Event, but I've recently gotten fascinated by it. I've dug into it, looking to learn more. This 1859 event that a sunstorm, caused the telegraph wires of 1859 to go out. Well, imagine if that happened today. Like, what would we do if a geomagnetic storm took out, for some period of time, all of our communications? So as I said, this event, we're teeing up this topic. There's going to be a lot more discussions about this. There's actually a invite-only discussion happening next week in Washington on BEAD, resilience, and restructuring. Email me, drew@breakfast.media, if you would like to know more about that or think you should be involved in that. And then we're really excited to pre-announce basically, save the date for our September 18th Resilient Digital Infrastructure Summit. This builds on the digital infrastructure investment series we've been doing for 7 years now, 6 or 7 years now, and we'll be talking much more about all aspects of resilient digital infrastructure. But with that, let's turn to our panel. We're going to hear first from Mahesh Krishnaswamy, who's the founder and CEO of Terra. And in that role, he leads the Terra team in their mission to deliver fast, affordable connectivity to people everywhere using beams of light. Okay. And so we're looking forward to I'm looking forward to learning what Terra does. But Mahesh also led the manufacturing supply chain efforts for Project Loon, which is a loony idea. No, just kidding. It's a very well-known Google, I don't know if it was a moonshot. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was clearly a very creative idea of using stratospheric balloons to deliver connectivity to remote and rural areas. So Mahesh will go first, but first let me introduce the rest of our panelists. Andy Burke, no stranger to Broadband Breakfast events. He spoke at our data centers, nuclear power and broadband event about 4 months ago. Andy led progress at federal, state, and local levels in broadband. He was the administrator of the Rural Utilities Service. He was also an ambassador for broadband, I think was the title that you had before that role. And of course, I think everyone knows he was the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee, the gigabit city, and incredible effort.
Chattanooga. That's one place we got to get that right.
How'd I do that? How'd I do that, Andy?
All the years of branding for Gig City, I can't let Knoxville. I can't let Knoxville take that.
Out the window. All right, boy, I flubbed that one. So Chattanooga is the gigabit city, and it has good claim for it, right? But you also did a great job of marketing too, Andy, right? So once you got the broadband, you sold it. Okay, so that's good too. So anyway, we're super excited to hear from Andy and what thoughts he has on this topic. He'll be followed by Dan York, who for the last 14 years has worked with the Internet Society, where he is now the chief of staff in the office of the CEO. Internet Society is an incredibly important and well-known NGO, non-governmental organization, nonprofit organization with a global footprint, and Dan has worked to not only deal with affordable, reliable, resilient internet, but he's led the effort around understanding low Earth orbit satellite systems such as Starlink, and wrote about internet shutdowns and resilience for the Internet Society's Pulse platform. Great article. Look forward to hearing more on Dan talk about that. And then batting cleanup will be Samantha Sharpman. Hope I got that right. Samantha is a national leader in broadband infrastructure and digital transformation as the director of philanthropic programs for Connect Humanity. She leads the Appalachia Digital Accelerator, supporting 68 communities across 11 states on securing sustainable broadband investments and advancing economically impactful connectivity strategies. She's also a former NTIA official and executive director of the Marconi Society. So really excited to have Samantha part of this discussion too. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Mahesh to tell us about how you approach this topic of resilience.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew, for kicking things off. As Drew mentioned, and as you can see from my name below, it's Mahesh Krishnaswamy, and I'm the founder and CEO of Tara. This is a moonshot initiative that was started out under Google X, which is the Alphabet's innovation engine. And we've been working on various technologies and various solutions to solve the global connectivity problem. And I have a few slides that I wanted to kind of share to kind of give you a little bit more background on where we are coming from. And I'll pull it up. So we were born at Google's Moonshot Factory, as I mentioned. This is the same group that actually works on a variety of things that solve tough problems, from transportations to medical devices to even drone-based delivery. So Waymo and Bing and Verily are some of the things that came out of it. But Loon was a connectivity initiative that we started out probably almost a decade ago, where we were looking at stratospheric balloons to provide broadband or at least basic level of cellular coverage to vast majority of the world that currently don't have internet access. But as Drew mentioned, along the way, we learned a few things, one of which is it's wicked hard to keep these balloons afloat and station keep and be able to provide connectivity, not to mention the economics associated with it. So while I was working on Loon, I came up with this crazy idea of like, what if there's a way by which we can take the technology that connects these balloons over the air, but somehow bring it down to ground and start connecting people. And the reason why I was fascinated by this problem was because, as today's topic talks about resilience, and we currently use either fiber optic cables or radio frequencies in order to be able to provide our vast connectivity solutions. Radio frequency is great. It has its own set of challenges, and I'll explain that in the electromagnetic spectrum in a little bit. But if you're looking for higher speeds, if you're looking for lower latency, then you're looking for solutions like fiber optic cable. But that can't go everywhere and is difficult to deploy and is subject to a lot of disruptions. Especially if you're looking at redundancy solutions, you need multiple paths to be able to cover that, and it could be very expensive to dig. And so that's why we're looking at what other ways by which we can solve this. But the solution actually lies deep inside the electromagnetic spectrum itself. And as Drew was mentioning about the solar flare, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, there is, if you go from left to right, you have the radio waves and all the way going up to the X-rays. That's your X-axis. So if you go left to right, you're increasing the amount of frequency. And your Y-axis is the atmospheric absorption, where you can't really transmit or receive any data if you have a big wall sort of in the middle that you see, which is blocked by atmosphere. So historically, what has happened is over the last several decades, roughly almost every decade, we've been going from 2G to 3G to 4G and now 5G in pursuit of more and more speeds, more and more bandwidth, and more users that can be packed within that area. But as you move forward, we are going to, in future, inevitably going to hit a wall where you can't have any more access to additional frequency because the Earth's atmospheric disturbances, as well as the attenuation, blocks these beams of electromagnetic spectrum. So we have essentially left scraping the bottom of the barrel on the left-hand side, trying to pack more users and more throughput and more number of devices in there. And as a result, it becomes congested. It's interference prone, radio frequency in general. And that's why it's, we allocate spectrum and we regulate it. But turns out that what if there's a way by which you can actually jump beyond this block of atmospheric, which is called as the terahertz gap, and move over to the light spectrum, which is essentially what fiber optics operate today. And at that higher frequencies, you not only, this is on a log scale, so you can definitely pack a lot more number of devices, a lot more data, and you're transmitting essentially the speed of light, so you effectively have very low latency as well. And the power consumption is very low, which is exactly where fiber optics are operating today. This is in a near visible, near IR spectrum, which is around 1550 nanometers. And that's basically what fiber optics use today to transmit, but it's inside a conduit. So what we have been doing at Tara is asking a question: what if we can actually get rid of the coax inside it and transmit that same data, but over the air? So essentially delivering fiber-like speeds, but deliver it wirelessly using the same spectrum. And that's essentially what Tara is working on. Tara is this moonshot that spun out of X recently. Over the last 3 months, we have successfully navigated a spin out of Google. And now we are part of an individual company led by external investors, and Google also being an investor in here. And we effectively have a product which is called as the Tara Lightbridge. This is one of our first generation products, which can deliver the speeds of fiber. We're talking about 20 gigabits per second bidirectionally. So it's essentially the speeds of fiber. You can think of it that way. It's a point-to-point solution which can transmit up to 20 kilometers. And it uses only 40 watts, which is less than a light bulb's energy requirement. And this technology transmits at 193 terahertz. So it's completely eye-safe lasers. And so even if a bird comes through the path, we are able to detect it and retransmit the path. And it's one of the most secure forms. So you can effectively deliver speeds of fiber without having to dig, trench, or lay any fiber. And it's subject to very little to no interference at all. So that's sort of a brief background about what Tara does. And we've been active in deploying this over a dozen plus countries all across. And I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about how we think about redundancy and resiliency when it comes to digital infrastructure, and how we are able to cope with some of the environmental challenges that's associated with delivering very high quality bandwidth to the vast majority of the world that needs it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And if you wouldn't mind just turning the, there we go. Now I need to change my view. Awesome. Thank you so much. Great to hear and get that context. Look forward to talking about some of those, geek terms. We spoke about the gap. What was that called again, that gap?
It's called as the terahertz gap.
The terahertz gap. Okay, great. Now I got something new to learn about. All right, let's turn it over to Andy. The floor is yours to give us your take on resilience.
Thanks, Drew. And I think over the course of a couple of years, maybe this is my fourth or fifth at one of these events, and so I'm waiting for my mug, or what do I get? Do I get to stamp something so that I can get some kind of?
We're working on those. We get t-shirts, Andy.
Okay, well, okay. I feels like I need to cash in somehow on this, but thank you as always for inviting me and allowing me to be here. I'm Andy Burke. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was a lawyer, a state senator, became the mayor of Chattanooga. We were the first city to deploy through our municipal utility, electric utility, universal fiber to the home, earning us the name Gig City. I may have said that, I don't know, 2 or 3 times over the course of the last 20 years. Who can really say? But yes, as Drew noted, I was a big proponent and espoused greatly the idea of internet as high-speed internet as a utility, as something that is a public good over the course of the last decade, and spent a good portion of my time on that, as well as working with the people at EPB in Chattanooga, which is one of the most progressive, thoughtful, and really innovative utilities in the country on the energy side as well. I was fortunate enough when I ended my time as mayor to join the administration to help, as Drew said, with the design of the broadband money, particularly at NTIA for BEAD, middle mile, and digital equity. And then once that got designed, and I spent several months trying to make sure that every state signed up for, because you had to opt in to both the digital equity and the BEAD money. I went out and traveled the country to make sure that every governor signed up to participate. We were fortunate that all 56, yes, I know there are not 56 states, but there were 50 states and 6 territories, all 56 entities signed up. And then I became the head of the Rural Utility Service, where we did about $4.5 billion worth of new connections. That is all in out there, has been is in some stage of development. So we're super proud of the people that were connected there. And then through the Inflation Reduction Act, got about $40 billion obligated for new clean energy across rural America. And those funds are still active today. And now I advise clients in the infrastructure area, including topically, I'm today in Columbia, South Carolina, with my client who does sodium ion battery storage. So, just once again, kind of in this area. Let me just say a couple of things quickly so that I can turn it over to Dan, I think. But from the beginning, I started hearing this in the cyber context, and that was EPB was getting 80 foreign actors a day, averaging 80 foreign actors a day trying to get into the network. And so the amount of time and energy that we spent going through these scenarios, particularly on the cyber side for the last, last 15 plus years for me, has been really remarkable, and to see how advanced these foreign actors are. The second thing that I will say is that that having traveled the country, and I probably traveled during my time in the federal government, I probably traveled 40 plus weeks of the year talking to utilities in the broadband, water, and energy side. The amount of effort and time that it takes in 2025 to engineer around the physical elements that are getting more severe every day, that's a real issue that we need to continue to look at, and it's going to be at play in the future. And then the thing number 3 that I will just say is, what we should all understand is that not only do we need to make the infrastructure resilient, but that high-speed internet itself is a resilient solution to other kinds of natural disasters. So we had right as COVID started in 2020, we had a tornado in Chattanooga. I was still mayor at the time, tore up all these things. We saw quickly how people were able to respond via high-speed internet to get their business back online, to connect with their community. And so high-speed internet being able to be resilient is a solution to other problems that people have with disaster type solutions, which is another reason why this topic is so important. I'll turn it back over to you, Drew.
Awesome. No, thank you for those great context. I think that's a perfect tee up for Dan York. Give us some of your thoughts on what Internet Society has been doing in the realm of resilience.
Sure. Thanks, Drew. It's great to be here. I think I was here a couple years back when we were talking about low Earth orbit satellites on one of the shows that was here, because that was a part of what I was working on for a while. I'll give a couple of quick things. So the Internet Society has been around for about 33 years. Some of you may be very familiar, some of you may not. We were formed by the early Internet pioneers with this vision that the Internet is for everyone. We were also focused around sort of the early place of the standards that create the Internet, like HTTP, FTP, all these things that come out of the Internet Engineering Task Force. And as we've evolved over the years, we've really focused on how do we get to a world, our strategy 2030 that we have is focused on how do we get to a world where everyone has access to affordable, reliable, resilient internet, the topic of today's conversation. We also want to make sure that when people are there, that they have a safe and secure experience. A lot of the work we do focuses around connectivity. There's still a third of the world, about 2.6 billion people, that do not have access to the internet in some way. And even for those who can get online, they can't afford it, or it's not reliable, it's not resilient, and the pieces there. So we do a lot of work in that space. We also have a foundation, which is a significant grantor in this space. We've granted over $65 million in about 1,000 projects across 120 countries over the past 5 years. So this is a space that we are very active in across the spectrum in different areas. I said, I think the last time I was on this show was we talked about low Earth orbit satellites. And when we talk about resilience and we talk about satellite infrastructure and pieces, this whole space with low Earth orbit satellites has created this amazing space where we can get, high speed, low latency connectivity in ways that are remarkable when we start talking about resilience, particularly in disaster situations, but in other kinds of ways as well. With the organization, I've done a lot of work around technologies, around different pieces with the low Earth orbit satellites as well. We also have a site called Pulse, which you mentioned, Drew, in my intro, which is pulse.internet.org, where we measure a number of different factors. And it brings stories around measurement here. And we have specifically on this topic, the Internet Resilience Index, where what we've gone and looked at is the infrastructure, market readiness, performance, security of various different countries. And you can go in here and see what we've discussed around this, what we're measuring. We also have a set of country reports for every country that we go in and talk about this as well. So these are all factors or parts of what we're doing as the Internet Society. If you think back to the early Internet, the Internet has sort of always had a resilient aspect to it. It was designed really from the early space to be able to route around local breakage. We have in the technology side, the packet switching model that we use allows routing to go into different connections and pieces. You can kind of think about it like if you're driving in your car and you suddenly see a roadblock, you can potentially go off to another road and get around it and whatever else. So the technology of the Internet is built that way. The standards that the IETF are developing continue to look at how do you go and develop that in different ways. But we're also looking at what are these larger factors. One of the posts I shared with Drew in advance was one of the topics we've been looking at in our Pulse website for a while is this increasing linkage between power infrastructure and internet infrastructure. We have a part of our Pulse site that tracks internet shutdowns, and these are government mandated shutdowns typically. We look at where they're happening and what's going on. But as we monitor these, we also look at what are happening in the way of outages and disruptions. And increasingly, we're seeing this linkage between the fact that we don't have power, and we need that power for the ones and zeros. You mentioned the magnetic storm. We've also seen this recently. If you looked earlier this year, the island of Puerto Rico had an instance where 90% of their electrical grid was knocked offline. So immediately we kind of went to look at internet measurements to see, how was the internet doing? And surprisingly, the internet dropped a bit, but it kept going. People were still able to use the internet. So I reached out to members of our Puerto Rico chapter. The Internet Society is about 120 chapters around the world. And I asked them what was going on. And they said that most houses in Puerto Rico have solar panels. The cheap solar panels out of China particularly have come around. Battery technology has gotten better. So they've got solar panels and batteries to power their home routers, their mobile devices, and the mobile providers have backed up their cables, their cell towers with generators and other pieces like this and parts. Now, what's interesting is you contrast that with the outage that happened earlier this year in Spain and Portugal and the Iberian Peninsula, where the cascading failure caused an outage of the grid throughout that area. And we had a complete catastrophic failure. No internet and in those areas at all, largely because, again, when we think resilience, in many parts of the world and in the US, we expect that electrical power will be there. We build our systems around the electrical power being there, which then provides internet. So it's interesting to see this kind of thing. And there's quite honestly, I think, lessons we can learn around resilience from parts of the world who do not take that electrical grid for granted in pieces. I'll just mention two other parts. The Marconi Society has convened a group that's talking about internet resilience. I think I might be teeing up something for Samantha here around this, but there's a group that I'm involved with, some others are involved with, that wrote a report last November looking at this and specifically kind of looking at this picture of how do you trace a packet from when it begins to when it ends, and what are the different pieces and parts that fit into there. And lastly, I would just in the United States, I'll do a little shout out as a volunteer when I'm not doing other work. I volunteer with an organization called the ITDRC, the Information Technology Disaster Resource Center. And these are folks that deploy trailers to connect communities in crisis. And so right now, they're actually deployed into Texas in the central, the flooding that's happening there. And they've put in there some communications trailers to give people local Wi-Fi and connectivity and charging stations. And these are, in general, often supported. Many of these stations are supported by Starlink. So you've got, a LEO connection bringing in that connectivity and then being able to share it out. So lots of things we could talk about.
Well, that's
you, Drew.
Again, that's awesome. A great intro. I should point out just on this kind of resiliency and outages note, fascinating about Puerto Rico, right? I mean, at my scout camp that I was at, right? When I get there, I got my particular cellular carrier, and that carrier has zero connectivity, right? I'm shucks out of luck the entire time I'm there. So I'm relying on people with other mobile services. And then at some point, like maybe Thursday, their service goes out too. So I don't feel quite as bad that I have no service. But it's kind of interesting, like what causes an outage, right? Is it the service? Is it the lack of internet? Is it the service provider being there but down, or electricity? And that's fascinating on the Portugal.
Well, can I just 1 second, one fact, because I worked a lot with the Puerto Rico grid. It averages going down 1 day a month.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's interesting. Last week there was a UN event, the World Summit on the Information Society, a review of that, and our chapter in Haiti was actually awarded a prize for some of the work they did with community networks, local ISPs that are being created, and doing this kind of stuff. And they also are looking at, they have solar power and battery backup systems to power all their nodes because, again, similar to that, they cannot count on the infrastructure being there. So it's very interesting. And they also have the added issue that gangs sometimes prevent people from actually getting access to the cell towers and stuff. So fascinating world.
Well, let's get Samantha's perspective here. The floor is yours for your introductory remarks.
All right. Thanks so much, Drew. And thanks to you as well, Dan. It's great to hear that you're still working with Marconi. I want to just say that my name is Samantha Sharpman-Cizik. I am the Director of Philanthropic Programs at Connect Humanity. And I'll bring up just a quick thing here. Yep. There we go. I serve so I said that I'm the Director of Philanthropic Programs. I lead or have led over the last couple of years one of our flagship programs. It's called the Appalachia Digital Accelerator Program. We have worked with quite a few different programs, depending on who you ask. We have 68. If you include the tribal entities, we are actually up to 71 communities across 11 states. So we have that, and we've already catalyzed $114 million so far through those engagements, which is really exciting. So we've worked with these communities to develop broadband strategies to unlock the public-private funding networks and build infrastructure that's not just about connectivity, making sure it's fast and affordable, but it's also resilient and locally anchored, right? We want to make sure that the communities are involved in these builds. So, a little bit about Connect Humanity. We believe that access to broadband is foundational to economic participation. And, so our work tends to focus on the intersection of connectivity and financial inclusion. So we support communities not only to secure infrastructure, but to access capital. That's another one of our big ideas here. We want to make sure they have planning support and the right kind of investment structures that make long-term sustainability possible for these networks. So, we see broadband resilience not just as a technical add-on, which it absolutely is, but it's also a critical part of ensuring that investments in infrastructure that are made generate value, right? Especially in the places where we have historically underrepresented or under-resourced communities or populations. We have a really good example of this in Eastern Kentucky, for example. In 2022, we had some pretty devastating floods that really came through and demolished a couple of the communities we worked with in that area. If any of you are familiar with Fleming Neon, you can understand how they were under over 11 feet of water during that period of time, really decimated their downtown area. And broadband was so critical to that. In that example, the community came together. They built kind of a resource center. They made sure that broadband was at the center of it, and that connectivity in one point of presence was able to support that whole community through a rebuilding and restructuring process. So, with devastating floods and communities, are facing these, cascading failures, and that there's delayed recovery when from, either FEMA not being as fast or as responsive or as well funded or staffed as we're accustomed to. We really need connectivity to be there. So how do we do this? My background really spans federal, philanthropic, and nonprofit sectors. I helped to advance a lot of the national broadband mapping and inclusion initiatives. But through Connect Humanity, we're really focused on this flexible capital approach. We hope that we can help communities kind of create investment-ready plans and that model cost scenarios for different types of structured funding strategies that combine not just philanthropic dollars or public dollars, but also long-term ownership by the communities themselves. So, as we face these threats from climate events and cyber attacks and aging infrastructure, which is very prevalent throughout Appalachia in particular, if it is there at all, it's usually pretty old, a lot of copper. Best option is usually cable, which is still pretty old at this point. Not a lot of fiber in these areas. So it's time to treat broadband resilience as an investment, not just in connectivity, but in the economic and safety health of our communities. So looking forward to discussing how we can better align funding, policy, local expertise around this. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And if you wouldn't mind, there we go, on sharing the view. Okay, so I'm going to actually read 3 separate questions. I've shared them with our panel already, and then we can kind of talk through them in whatever order. And so what are the top risks to digital infrastructure today? And I'm giving a couple ideas in my next question. What lessons have we learned from past outages, whether caused by wars, natural disasters, or cyber warfare and electronic warfare? Regarding natural disasters, what disaster recovery best practices have proven most effective in hurricane and wildfire-prone regions? And then the third of this bunch of questions, what role does redundancy play? Like maybe as a subset of resilience, like redundancy. So let's go through, give everyone's perspective on this kind of question. What are the biggest problems? What falls in the bucket of a problem set for digital resilience? Mahesh, let's go to same order we started.
Sure. I think this is an excellent question. I'm going to kind of tee this off into a few different things. First of all, when you look at digital infrastructure, we need to also think about the whole power of the internet and the connectivity is based on the people that are present on the network. So even to this day, roughly a third of the world is still really offline. So you're not even really truly accessing the full power of the internet. And so the more people come online, the more you're able to create a content and you're more able to consume. And the more important it is to have a very resilient network to be able to support this. So when it comes to threats, there are really like a couple of things that I can think of. One is threats to the physical infrastructure itself, which is, anytime you're laying physical infrastructure, be it a tower, be it fiber being run, they're subject to a lot of cuts. They're subject to disruptions. Natural disasters play a very critical role. So these I all bucket under physical infrastructure, which could come apart during any kind of situation. And then the next one is cyber warfare. I'm just going to portray sort of a very draconian scenario, and it's a really hypothetical scenario. But imagine if you wake up tomorrow and you suddenly realize that you don't have access to the internet. You're just literally cut off. You can't call anyone. You can't reach anyone. You can't, most of your day-to-day activities is going to come to a grinding halt. Your bank accounts is going to be sort of off limits. You essentially are in a situation where it's like back to the Stone Ages. In fact, I would even argue some of the energy infrastructure could be impacted. This is sort of a real threat, and we are not really thinking about this in a much more broader sense. And rather than wait for something like this to happen and then start to be reactive or trying to scramble, how about we actually think about actually building a more resilient network now and start thinking about creating a more robust network, which is not only secure but is also built in such a way where you're able to handle any some of these challenges that you could face. So, I mean, I think to kind of summarize, there's really two big buckets. One is the physical infrastructure, and then the second one is the cyber warfare. And I think we need to protect both of those.
No, useful dichotomy there. Andy, how about you? What's your kind of takeaways for best practices from previous disasters or outages?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with everything that Mahesh just said, and it's super relevant. And when I was at RUS, we dealt with all the hurricanes from across the lands for the last few years. And I would just start saying that this idea of, particularly on the power side, people are underestimating the threat that the lack of electrons that we have on our system and the lack of resiliency that we have, what it will do to our economy, what it can do to our long-term viability. TVA, which is where the sector that I'm in, it had rolling blackouts for the first time in its history a couple of years ago. And as you see more infrastructure coming online, and whether you believe the highest estimate of AI or the medium or the lowest, this is fundamental change going on, because traditionally in our areas, most of America has seen either flat or declining load for our electric systems. And now all these places that have been used to managing a declining business are now seeing incredible load growth. And when you change your business model and you have the same people there, all of a sudden you can see some real crises happening going forth. And so, like, there's a people component to this. There's like that physical component to this, and then, as Mahesh said, the cyber. And so the one thing I will just say is we have to train people. It's not just the physical pieces, and it's not just getting some new defenses for our cyber pieces. It's having people and policies that plan for the future and allow us to build this more resilient infrastructure.
Dan, your thoughts on this, lessons learned from past outages?
Yeah, I mean, plus one to what Manesh and Andy both said as far as the different pieces and parts there. And I already talked a bit. I think that power infrastructure part that Andy just referred to is huge because, we've spent a lot of time in the internet technical community looking at how do we make these protocols more resilient? How do we make the systems work their way? We've done that. And I think, is what you talked about as far as how do we look at what are some of the lessons. If I look at what like ITDRC is doing right now in Texas and in the hurricanes in the Southeast, they're deploying trailers that have LEO-based systems that bring connectivity down, share that out, or they can work with local, fixed wireless type of connections. There's that kind of connectivity is there. The technology is there. If I were running any kind of business that needed connectivity, I would look at how do I get a LEO system or something as a backup, because the technology can allow that switching and that change there. But the important part, I think, is that power part. But then I want to key on what Andy just said. We also have to look at the human resilience. The beautiful part about the community-centered connectivity that Samantha was mentioning and the work they're doing, The work we do with community networks, I imagine what Andy did with Chattanooga, is you've got people locally who understand how to go and build and maintain and defend their local internet connectivity. It's not just coming from some corporation somewhere else in some other place. You do have that local technical knowledge. And I think that's a critical piece, is understanding what kind of capacity building can you offer? How can you help people do that? Because it's one thing to drive in a trailer and connect it up and get people with immediate connectivity in crisis. But it's how do you rebuild that long term? How do you make sure it works? How do you make it resilient in the first place? It's that human resilience, which also plays a role. And then something Manesh said too, all of our lives are going on to, we're doing everything digitally. What Andy said, if the power goes out in here where I live in northern Vermont and the internet goes out, I can't do much of anything. I can't go and set up doctor's appointments. I can't order stuff. I can't, I can't do much. We have to look at the resilience of all of those applications. We have to look in this bigger picture holistically as we move more and more as we create digital infrastructure that governments are using and stuff. Where are the points of failure?
Right.
Because we may not all know them. If you look at some of the big outages that have happened with AWS, with some of these pieces, sometimes people didn't realize that they were actually reliant on some little service over here that they didn't know. So mapping that out and understanding.
And do you track like outages, or who tracks like, hey, this outage lasted X hours or X days? I mean, is there like a global compendium of where outages are and are happening?
There's a couple of different places. Cloudflare with their Cloudflare Radar posts some. There's another organization called IOTA, which is out of, I'm going to mess it up, either Georgia Tech or George Mason, one of those. But IOTA is an organization that goes and tracks it. Another one is called UNI. There's a number of these organizations that track that. In the work we do, we track internet shutdown. So we're focused on some government mandated pieces, but the outages are being tracked by others out there on the internet side.
Okay. Samantha, do you have anything to add on this, or do you have any thoughts on the redundancy piece that I asked?
Sure, a couple things. First of all, one of the other things to really look at about building resilience is, and we've seen this very clearly in the most recent hurricanes in Hilton and Helene, where even buried infrastructure, which is looked at as being a bit more resilient than, say, aerial that can be blown down or pulled down, it was washed away along with streets and other, infrastructure. So in sometimes these things can be mitigated by developing stormwater management. So better management of that, particularly in hilly or mountainous areas, in thinking about how we direct water and stormwaters away from cities and roads is really a critical element of planning that we need to look at. And it doesn't get enough attention here. It can help preserve buried infrastructure. The other one that I want to say, and it kind of goes to a little bit of what Dan was talking about with the human infrastructure piece of this, is particularly in rural areas, and of course, I'm speaking of my friends in Appalachia here, there is a huge over-reliance on single ISPs. So when you're talking about redundancy or whatnot, if you only have one player in town and they're not local, they're a Charter, an AT&T, no, I'm not trying to rag on them. They're not your neighbors, right? They have presence in 40 plus states. So when one network goes down, it is a tiny fraction of their business. It is not the burning, high alert situation that you get when it's a local ISP. It is their main center of business. They're going to be responsive as fast as humanly possible because that's their bread and butter. So over-reliance on ISPs and also over-reliance on incumbent ISPs are the pieces that I would add there, because we want the communities to have a little more ownership of not only the networks, but also the recovery process.
I know Andy wants to jump in, so go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would, two quick points. I'll try to be quick. Number one is, after the hurricanes last year, I went to Buncombe County, Asheville, North Carolina. And the number one thing they complained about was the redundancy of the telecom system, then how slow it was to get back. They were more impressed by water and by electricity and more annoyed by the telecom system than anything else. And I was shocked by that. I was just shocked by that. Thing number two is a totally different point. I'm not going to do an advertisement for my client because that, you know, they're not a sponsor here. I will just say that that I've been talking a lot about this with people in the last few days. As we have these trade barriers and these things that are stopping us from accessing other, you know, technology and materials and all kinds of things from other countries, the tendency will actually be to narrow the type of options that we have as opposed to increase redundancy. And so we have to figure out how to resist that urge to say, like, well, we no longer have access to these minerals. We no longer have access to this kind of technology. The quickest, fastest, cheapest way is everybody's got to do it this way. And if we do it that way, then we are making ourselves more prone to really bad disasters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, 100% agree with what Andy just said. As far as, you know, we need many choices, you know, options, competition. I want to build on what Samantha said too. A critical part around that too is there's something called an internet exchange point, or an IXP, which is when different networks come together and we call it peering in the industry, but they connect together, so they agree to exchange traffic. And the beautiful part about an IXP is that it can bring networks together so that you can have more of those paths. Now, it doesn't help if, you know, there's a flood that takes out the building that houses the IXP or something. But, you know, outside of that, if you have multiple IXPs or multiple ways, they create multiple paths. So something to look at is what's the resilient in your state, in your country, in your place. How many of
Well,
these
just
IXPs?
jumping in, data centers, the kind of standard is you need four. You need like at least four pathways into the data center. I know that's a little different from an IXP, but in fact, in IXPs, you're probably going to have many, many more, right? So the point of redundancy is quite key. Samantha, you got your real hand as well as
I
your
know.
virtual.
I was like, I can't find the button. I just want to add on to the IXP things. It's also a great way when you are reliant on, you know, single ISPs in areas and you might only have, you know, one source of that internet traffic. Bringing IXPs closer can help speed up the rate of data transmission, which actually improves your overall service quality. So that's another thing where, you know, we often struggle with, you know, how to get good and fast service in these rural areas. You know, having not just fiber, but also more pieces of the internet infrastructure helps to improve the overall landscape.
Okay, so I was asking just a bit about redundancy, and clearly we need redundancies in IXPs and data centers. What does that mean more broadly? Like, can we have two electric grids? Would that make sense? Like what is Puerto Rico where it goes down once? I mean, they basically are more prepared for us because they have that risk of it going down. So how do we kind of get the mindset that we've got a secondary grid when one grid goes down? Any thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that you're seeing, I'm sorry, Mahesh, if you.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's very important to kind of separate a couple of things here. One is redundancy and the other one is resiliency.
Right.
When you have a 1+1 configuration, you just have a redundancy configuration. So if one goes down, the other one is able to come back. It's usually requires some kind of a manual interruption, or it's usually subject to some kind of a downtime. A resilient network, on the other hand, thinks about holistically the entire thing and can predict what something might go down and preemptively or reduce the amount of downtime to a much more lower percentage. So I think we need a combination of both. You just don't need only redundancy, you also need resiliency there. With the advancements of AI and everything else, I think we can do a much better job of predicting outages and be able to solve for it. So sorry, go ahead, Andy.
Oh, good distinction. Let's go back to Andy, and I may have cut Dan off too. So Andy, your
No,
thoughts.
I was with my friends at EPB yesterday in Chattanooga and with the planning and the quantum people. And one of them said that the grid is the most complicated machine in the on our planet. Now, people can agree or disagree, but that gives you an idea, I think, of kind of where we are. I mean, more things are going behind the meter every day because of this problem that you're talking about. So they're not connecting to the grid. And then that needs more redundancy and resiliency solutions because you're not connected to the grid. And so you have people getting their energy from, so all these like, and I think, and then you have technology between AI and then, virtual power plants are going to be a bigger part of our energy solution going forward, because particularly with what we saw out of the bill last week, that is, or 2 weeks ago, that is going to push more distributed energy out there, less centralized energy. And all this stuff is pointing towards new, different, localized, distributed solutions, and trying to create redundancy more locally.
And I would say that there's, this distributed generation, one of the terms of having more and more power out there happening out there on the edge and doing this kind of things. One of the interesting aspects that we have to watch at, though, is that many of those systems also have a reliance on internet connectivity, right, to manage some of those systems. So you have this situation where the internet is reliant on the power grid, which is reliant on the internet. So you kind of we need to keep it all running, right?
Well, so let me ask my question.
Wildfire zones a lot.
Do we need a second grid? Like, and I'm going to ask my favorite question I want your thoughts on is, what is the danger of a geomagnetic storm like the Carrington event? Like, how can we prepare for that? Do we literally need like a secondary grid or a secondary alternative way of doing things when the grid goes down? Let's, again, everyone's take on this question. Samantha, you want to say anything on this?
I think, this is not my place of expertise, but I would say that my gut says that these are opportunities for renewable energies, that there are other ways, when you think of, your house, you get the backup generator when your power goes out. Well, how can we create backups to our energy system and our electrical grids? Can we leverage solar power? Can we kind of disperse solar nodes to do even pockets of backup instead of one singular location for that? What I would love to see some of that more explored as ways to mitigate resilience or increase resilience.
I would add that I think it's again some of that local power, like I talked about in Puerto Rico and in Haiti. We're seeing it in other parts. It's having that local power on that. There's also people experimenting with all sorts of interesting other protocols. There's something called Meshtastic, which is a way to use the low RAN protocols to go and be able to have connectivity that's on its own separate network kind of thing. So there's lots of experimentation and people that are there. So keeping it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I did not know about this 1859 Carrington event, but it actually helped me to kind of geek out a little bit to learn more about how it actually impacts things. And when you have an event like that, a solar flare, you have to see what kind of things get impacted. And most of the electronics and the current radio frequency communications are definitely impacted by those things. But this is where you need a diversity of technologies as well. So from what I read, things like free space optics would be less vulnerable than radio frequency waves to be able to compensate for this. It does not create a Faraday cage kind of effect. You just need a very narrow beam, and as long as those are shielded, you'll be able to protect against those kind of disasters. So I think the point is that in order to improve the redundancy as well as the resiliency of the networks, we need to kind of increase the awareness of some of these emerging technologies and make sure that we are positioning them well in advance, even before the event happens, rather than scrambling in afterwards. And so that's how you'll be able to build a truly resilient network that will be able to overcome, hopefully, the next Carrington event.
Well, I'll be studying that one. Great thoughts, and thanks for your participation, contribution. Andy, we're going to give you the last word on your thoughts of preparing for an event of this sort.
Well, I'm never going to try to out-engineer Mahesh, so don't expect that. I think to his earlier point about like about redundancy and resiliency is like a second grid. All that does is it continues to make us reliant on this one big thing. And so what you're seeing to handle exactly what you're talking about, Drew, is microgrids. It's storage. It's all these localized, differentiated solutions. And then, yes, to Dan's point, I think it's great, but then, hopefully somewhere you're going to have these technological virtual power plants and other things that can find where things are operating, where things are cheapest, and that's how you work it. But everybody, I don't mean to be the person that's getting in my basement and closing the door, but like the old style people who had the generators at their house because they were worried about things going down, were headed more to that kind of world.
Well, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate everyone's contribution. As I said at the start of this, this is really the kickoff of multiple discussions, including our event on September 18th, Resilient Digital Infrastructure. As you can see, the problem set is vast and numerous, and appreciate everyone's participation in this discussion, whether you're one of our panelists, and we want to thank Mahesh, Andy, Dan, and Samantha for your time today. On behalf of each of them, I'm Drew Clark, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care, everyone.